How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself? Welcome to the Disrupt Yourself podcast, a podcast where we discuss strategies and advice for how to climb the S-curve of learning in your career and life, disrupting who you are to slingshot into who you want to be. I'm your host, Whitney Johnson, and today our guest is BJ Fogg, a world-renowned behavioral scientist who talks about habit formation, which of course is fundamental to personal disruption. BJ is the founder of Stanford's Behavior Design Lab. He's been described by Fortune as one of 10 new gurus you should know. And among those he's influenced include the likes of Mike Krieger, who founded Instagram in one of Fogg's classes, Tim Ferriss, who we all know from 4-Hour Workweek, and Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod. BJ has just released his new book, Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything, which Gretchen Rubin has described as deeply researched and a highly practical book for anyone interested in changing their behavior. BJ, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Behavioral scientist. It's not something that most children dream of being or doing when they grow up. So what did you think you wanted to be as a child, and where did you grow up?
Good question. Well, I grew up in Fresno, California, and I grew up in a Mormon family. And, at least I felt part of being raised Mormon and practicing that religion, it was really about serving other people. And it was very clear to me young that you are on this planet to serve others and help others. And fast forward to today, I think that's what Tiny Habits does. And I think my career and my life has been guided by that. Even though I'm not a practicing Mormon, I feel like that early training and that point of view of the world has stuck with me. And by helping people become who they want to be, Tiny Habits and what I share there, that's what that's about. I feel like I'm fulfilling what my parents and ancestors thought that this life was all about.
Interesting. So you had this really deep sense of how do I serve?
Yeah.
And when you were a little boy in high school, what did you think you were going to be? I'm interested in kind of how the permutations or how it's evolved over time.
Well, my father is a doctor, so of course, everyone in that situation at least, think, I'm going to be a doctor. I really wasn't clear on. I know I loved school. I loved learning. I loved exploring new things. I loved tackling complex projects. That was all clear to me. But what I exactly thought I would do, I don't know. When I was an undergraduate, I was bold enough to say, well, I did all the pre-med stuff. I took the MCAT. I did well. And once I got my score, I was like, fine, I did it. I don't want to be a doctor. But I could be, but I don't want to be. And then I just took my time. It was really odd. I would just get the course catalog and flip through it. And any class I wanted, I'll take this one and this one. It took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. I had almost twice the number of units as you needed to have. It was a blast. And even when I was done with that, all my friends from high school, they were in careers and all that. I still didn't know what I was going to do. So then I went to France to learn French. So I somehow felt that I wasn't under tons of pressure. I mean, I was running a small company of my own. I was making money. I was supporting myself. So I no longer had any pressure from my parents or anybody else to hurry up. It was like, this is fun. I get to learn things. I get to explore things. And this is the time of my life. And I encourage students to do this. And that's the time of your life when you can really explore. You don't have kids. You don't have mortgage. You don't have huge responsibilities. Travel the world, learn what you want to learn. And then eventually I figured it out. It really was understanding how to help people change their behavior, and specifically through technology. And that's what I did my doctoral research in. It was how can computers help change attitudes and behaviors, and specifically to help them be healthier.
So I love that you said that you sort of did, okay, I've taken the MCAT, I've done well, I could become a medical doctor. Instead, you decided to become a PhD doctor, but you allowed yourself the time.
Yeah, but that took a few years. I mean, I was just, and then it's like, oh, I want to be a writer. My parents were like, you don't make any money as a writer. Don't do that. And, but I was writing professionally, and I was doing professional work in designing marketing materials, just in my own little agency. It just gave me a ton of autonomy. I didn't have to answer to anybody.
Yeah, interesting. And you're now have written a book called Tiny Habits, which seems to be the culmination of over several decades of work.
Right.
Can you tell us why you decided to write this book now?
So in my research lab at Stanford that I've run since 1999, I have the flexibility to study whatever I want. I make sure it overlaps with what my students want to study. And so we research various things. And it always has to do with human behavior in some way. And we take on ambitious projects like world peace and getting people back to nature and reducing screen time and things like that, like important things. So I was doing all this research and teaching at Stanford, and then outside of Stanford doing a lot of things as well. And I just felt like I was discovering and innovating and researching things, and I was so excited. And I was already teaching Tiny Habits. I started teaching it publicly in 2011. 200 to 300 people a week I would teach personally. And people said, where's the book? Where's the book? Even back in 2011, they're like, where's your book on this? I was like, well, I don't have time. I'm not ready. I don't have time. And that went on for years and years until one day I had a dream. Well, one night I had a dream that I was in a plane and the plane was going to crash. And I fully believed that I was going to die. And my reaction to, I'm going to die in just a few seconds, my reaction was deep, deep regret that I hadn't shared my work in a way that would be helpful enough to people, that the way I had shared my work was limited to students in my class, professionals who came to work with me, and bits and pieces here and there, but there really wasn't anything. And I woke up from the dream and I was like, oh my gosh, so that's how I'd feel if I were going to die right now. And I told my partner, I said, wow, I just had this dream last night. And then about 3 weeks later, a guy named Doug Abrams emailed me and said, hey, I want to talk to you about doing a book. And he had done books for the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and so on. He said, I think your stuff is world changing. And those are the kind of books I do. And we sat down, and he was a Stanford graduate. We hit it off, and it came shortly after the dream. And it turned out to be, the dream got me to stop doing all the research and limit my other projects and focus on a book, which is a huge effort. And so that was actually that dream that helped clarify my priorities.
Wow, that is such a powerful story. Well, then let's talk about this book that you've now codified your Fogg behavior model. It's very simple. Do you say B equals MAP, or do you say MAP? How do you describe it when you talk about it?
Yeah, I say MAP, and I describe it this way. Behavior happens when. So the equal sign, I say happens when.
Okay.
Behavior happens when three things come together at the same moment: motivation, ability, and prompt. And then often I add a second sentence. If any one of those three components is missing, then the behavior won't happen. So that's the simplest explanation.
All right. So let's take each of them in turn. I've had a chance to go through the book, and I am really excited for everybody to hear these ideas. Let's take M first. And one thing that I noticed that I thought was really powerful is you say outcomes and aspirations are not behaviors. So talk to us about the M part of or piece of the equation.
Yeah. So M is motivation. And so often when, say it's first of the year and people are setting New Year's resolutions, or they sit down and think, well, what do I want? They're like, oh, I want to exercise more. Okay. Now, some people truly do want to exercise more. Other people just feel like they should. And what I've found in teaching over 40,000 people habits personally, so over the years, it just adds up. And I haven't even added up the hours. But it's many, many, many hours that habits that you feel like you should have do not readily become habits. Instead, you should focus on your wants. So in the Tiny Habits approach, you help yourself do what you already want to do. So you pick behaviors that align with aspirations that you already want, and you don't focus on the shoulds. We have plenty of wants that are good and beneficial, that we haven't put into practice yet. And with tiny habits, you can. So first of all, with motivation, what you don't do is pick a behavior that feels like it should and then try to motivate yourself to do it. That's a dead-end path. Instead, first and foremost, you pick the things that you already want to do.
Oh, so you really change your choice set, right? So what you're saying
Yeah.
is that so many of us have our choice set and we're pulling from our shoulds. Shift to your choice set of wants, because it is such a large choice set. There's lots and lots of things that we can work on.
And let me give an example. So for any given aspiration, we'll just say with physical activity, like I want to be more physically active. There are hundreds of ways you can be more physically active. One of them is go to the gym and walk on the stair climber. Who wants to do that? Instead, right?
Not me.
Instead,
No.
You could be biking, you could be dancing. In my own life, so we live part-time in Maui. I surf. I love it. I wake up and I can't wait to go surfing. And so find a physical activity you want to do. If it's productivity, don't force yourself to do things you don't want to do. Find those productivity habits that you want to do. And in Tiny Habits, I guide people step by step through the process so you can figure out what those things are. But that's the takeaway. Focus on creating habits that you want and not the should.
Will you talk, BJ, very briefly about focus mapping? Because I actually went through this exercise briefly for myself because I'm working on my next book and started to apply your idea. Can you talk about it at a high level so that you can pique people's curiosity of how that works?
Yeah, great. And it follows the last topic really well. One thing you do in behavior design, and again, in Tiny Habits, I walk you through step by step in this, is once you know what your aspiration is, like, oh, I want to read more. Now that's not a behavior or a habit. That is an aspiration. Then you come up with a whole bunch of different specific behaviors that would lead to reading more. Maybe you listen to books, audiobooks. Maybe you read while you're on the subway. Maybe you read at lunch. Maybe you join a reading club. There's dozens of ways to read more. Once you have that set, you match yourself with the best behavior for you. One of those methods is called focus mapping. That's going to be hard to describe because it's a visual method. So to describe it in audio is hard. But what I can explain are the criteria that you use for matching yourself. So what you're trying to do is match yourself with the best, say, habit for reading more. And it has three criteria. Number one, it will be effective. Like if you do this habit, such as every time that you click your seatbelt and commute to work, you will turn on your audiobook. Is that going to be effective? Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of stuff from books. Two, it needs to be a habit you want to do. We've talked about that. So that's the motivation part of the behavior model. And then three, it needs to be behavior you can do. You may be listening to me talking about surfing, and yeah, it's going to be effective in getting your shape. And yeah, you want to, but if you don't live by waves, you can't do it. So those are the three criteria: impact, want to do, and can do. And you find of all the different options, say for reading more, you find the behaviors that are the best fit on those three. And those are what I call golden behaviors. Those are what you design for. Those are what you turn into habits.
So good. And for everybody who is listening, I really encourage you to buy the book. We're actually going to give away one book to someone who's listening to the podcast.
Great.
It's on page 59 if you want to look at it in greater detail. So that's M. M equals motivation. Let's now go to the second variable, which is A. A equals ability. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so ability comes in when you're matching yourself. You're going to pick behaviors you can do. If you have no ability to go surfing, either move to Maui where you can, or don't pick that one. And in the Tiny Habits method specifically, what you do is you take the habit you want and you make it super, super small, like as small as you can. Let's say you want to floss every day. And that sounds small, but guess what? You make it even smaller. You focus on flossing one tooth. And let's say you decide you're going to read every time you sit down on the subway. That's going to be your reading habit. Guess what? Don't read a chapter. Instead, read one paragraph. You make it so tiny, so simple. And the reason you do that is if a behavior is super easy to do, you don't need very much motivation to do it. So our motivation goes up and down over time, and we don't have a lot of control over it. And looking at that reality, what I created in the Tiny Habits method is if it's so tiny, so easy, then even when your motivation sags, you can still read the paragraph. You can still floss one tooth.
Right. Would you be willing to share the story that you share about Instagram in the book, just briefly, about this idea of making it simple? Because a lot of our listeners are very keen on Instagram, and I think they would find it interesting.
Yeah. So before the iPhone, before there was such thing as apps, I was teaching a class at Stanford. A lot of my work is looking ahead and saying, what's coming next? What's coming next? And I was like, okay, these things that we carry around that we call mobile phones, we'll be able to take pictures in the future, and we'll be able to share those pictures. So as a design project for 2 weeks, come up with a positive use of this technology that will come. We don't have it now, but it will come. So the students worked in teams of 3. One of the teams included a student named Mike Krieger, and their team put together they didn't code it, they didn't create an app, but they put together an idea and a presentation, mock-up around a concept they called share the sunshine. Essentially, it was you would take a picture of something beautiful or nice in your life, and you would share it with a friend of yours who you felt like could use some cheering up. And so Mike later built Instagram, 2 to 3 years later, built Instagram. And the idea from Share the Sunshine, I believe, was the kernel of that. Now, when he was building Instagram, that came after doing a startup that didn't quite work. He pivoted and pivoted. And then they decided to do this kind of photo sharing. And the key there was he kept it so simple. His competition was like Flickr and other photo sharing that I can't remember the name of because they've kind of been lost to history. They were complicated. They had lots of features. What he did, and it takes real courage to do this, he just made it so easy to do. Now Instagram is more complicated, but back in the day, you take a picture, you put on a filter, and you post it. That's all you could do. And it was only square pictures, and it was only on iOS. And they kept it just so simple and limited, but that's what made them stand out from all the competition at the time. It was very, very easy to do. And the next piece, and this is important in creating habits, it helps people feel successful. So on one hand, it was simplicity that changed behavior. On the other hand, and this is what wires in habits, is the feeling of success. And the filters that you apply to the photos, back in the day, that was kind of a big thing. And as you applied a different filter, you're like, oh my gosh, that looks great. Oh my gosh, I created artwork. Oh, I'm so good at this. So it was giving you these surges of this emotion of feeling successful. And it was that combo. It's very simple and it helps you feel successful. That's what made Instagram grow like crazy.
Yeah. And, it's so funny when you're saying that because I never was a person who took photos. And so now with Instagram, I'll take a photo, and I was just on Instagram right before we were on the line together and, used a filter, and I felt so effective, right? I felt that surge of pride. One thing I think would be really fun is, do you have any pictures of you surfing perchance?
Very few, but I do have some.
Oh,
very few.
Okay, so I think it would be really fun if you have one of you on Instagram and that we could share, because it feels like that would kind of capture the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I surf hundreds of times a year, but I don't have a photographer out there. But just before I left Maui about 2 weeks ago, I asked my partner to come out and take some shots. And I think we do. The waves are really, really tiny, so nobody's going to be impressed.
Oh, I'll be impressed. Okay, let's go to P.
Yeah, so which is prompt.
Yeah.
And on that photo of me surfing, send me an email, and that will be my prompt. Okay, so P.
Oh, I like how you tied that back, BJ. Well done. Okay.
Well, you know what? What's so fun about behavior and the behavior model is we have it all around us. I mean, everything comes back. Every behavior you do or don't do can be understood in terms of motivation, ability, and prompt, or the lack thereof. So a prompt is a thing that says, do this now. Okay, so when you send me the email, that will be my prompt to go in and get that photo of me surfing and send it to you. Now, if you don't have a prompt, you don't have behavior. And let me give an example.
Okay.
I'm in Boston, and I was speaking and sharing at the Harvard bookstore last night. It went really well. I had a blast. And on the way home in the car, the driver said, hey, I'm picking you up at 11 in the morning and you'll go to Google and speak at Google and so on. I was like, great. So in my mind, it was like, I don't have anything till 11. So I'm in there in the morning. I'm just going through my routines. I was going to write some thank you notes to people. And I get a message from one of my colleagues and she said, hey, did you make it to this morning's meeting? And I was like, what meeting? And I looked at my schedule and an hour earlier, I was supposed to be speaking to this group of professionals and I totally missed it. Now, it was early in the morning, but I had the motivation to go. I had the ability to go because I got up at like 5, the meeting was at 7, but I did not have a prompt. So even though I had motivation ability, I did not have a prompt, so I didn't go. Well, the good news is I got in touch with the organizer and I said, oh my gosh, is it still worthwhile coming? And he said, yes. And so I went over and I taught, but this stuff's all around us. In that case, the missing component was prompt. Had I had a prompt, of course I would have been there on time. And this leads to another concept. I don't know if you want to go here, and I describe it in Tiny Habits. If there's a behavior you want to happen and it's not happening, there's a systematic way to troubleshoot. You start with the prompt. If a behavior is not happening, you always know it's one of those 3 components that's missing. Most people start with motivation. They beat themselves up or they make themselves feel bad. That's the wrong approach. Instead, go, oh, did I have a prompt to go to my 7 a.m. meeting? No, I didn't. Design a prompt. You can design prompts in various ways. It could be an alarm. It could be somebody calling you. It could be something sitting by my iPad that says, don't forget your 7 o'clock meeting this morning. If you're prompted and you don't do the behavior, let's say you remind yourself to work out and you don't, the next thing you look at is ability. And it's like, can I make it easier to do? How do I make this so easy to do? And with that, with a prompt and ability, most of the times you do the behavior.
And then if you don't do it,
guess what?
Can I finish your sentence?
Yes. Go.
If you don't, it's because you're not motivated.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so brilliant.
So isn't that comforting to know there's a system?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that, let's say your spouse or kid didn't do something you want. Most people start with the motivation piece. They get mad and they do a guilt trip. Wrong direction. Figure out, did they have a prompt? Was it easy enough to do? And then if you're not motivated to do it, what I suggest is you back up and you pick a different behavior that you are motivated. If you didn't go to the gym, you had a prompt, you made it really easy, you didn't go because you didn't want to, guess what? Pick a different exercise.
Yeah.
So
good.
You can't always just pick something else, but if you can, go back and match yourself with a different way to read more, or a different exercise, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve.
So something you talked about that I thought was just so a hidden gem, and I use that word on purpose. You talk about pearl habits. Tell us what those are.
Pearl habit is a type of tiny habit. It uses the tiny habits method. And in the tiny habits method, you take the behavior you want and you have an existing routine prompt you. So I'll get to pearl habits in about 30 seconds. Let me lay the foundation here. So with tiny habits, if you want to floss, you scale it back to 1 tooth, and then you find what it comes after. It would be brushing your teeth. So you use brushing your teeth as your reminder to floss. You don't use Post-its or alarms or things like that. Instead, you use your existing routine to remind you to do the behavior. So that's how tiny habits gets you to figure out what the prompt's going to be. Now with pearl habits, what you do if there's something that happens to you in your life that's annoying, like a neighbor's dog barking or people cutting you off in traffic or your kid complaining, you can take that existing, it's not quite a routine, but that existing phenomenon and use it to remind you to do something positive. So let's say, for example, and this is the habit that I have. Let's say somebody is in front of me in the checkout stand and he or she is going on and wasting time and causing me to be late. Okay, that's an irritant, and that happens. When that happens, my response to that, my habit is to tell myself in my head, everyone's doing the best they can. Nobody tries to screw up. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that annoyance that person who is slowing everybody down. And I'm using that to remind me to have this internal, it's exactly those words I say to myself, which then gives me more empathy and understanding and reduces my frustration. So I call it pearl habits because you take a frustration or an irritant and you use it to create something more beautiful or valuable.
I love that, BJ. And part of why I think that's so meaningful to me is I think that all of us get triggered, and so there are irritants and things that annoy us, but there's also things that trigger us where we have that emotional reaction to something that we don't mean to. It's just there.
Yeah.
And what I love is that as I'm thinking about this and interacting with your material is this notion of I can take that moment when I get triggered and I can turn that into a pearl if I really use that. And that to me I think has the potential to effect change much, much quicker because there's so much energy in that moment when we get triggered. And so what we can do with that. So that's something I really want to play with. And I just thought that I wanted to call that out so that people could hear you talk about that.
And let me share another example so people can hear it can be used broadly. There are times out surfing at the coral you get cut, which is not good. And so there was a time, probably a couple of months ago, I got a little cut. Even a little cut's a problem. And so, I patched it up, but it was painful through the day. So what I did was I created a very quick pearl habit. Every time this little cut, it was just kind of on this, I don't know how to describe it, part of your hand near your thumb. Every time that would cause me pain, I would think of how grateful I am to able to be outside and active. So instead of saying, when's this pain going to go away and what am I going to do about the pain? I use that pain to remind me how fortunate and how grateful I was to be able to active and outside. And that changed my perception of the pain and it helped me. Yeah, it was just different. And so you can use it even for temporary things like that, and in a few days the pain's gone and the habit served its purpose and you go on with your life.
Oh, so good. Okay. So I wanted to share with you two things that I'm already doing differently because I read your book.
Okay,
one thing is that I recite to myself every morning, I change best by feeling good, not bad. And I don't know if you want to share anything around that, but that's one thing. And the second thing that I've been doing is when I get out of bed, I sit on the edge of my bed and I say, it's going to be a great day. Oh, I feel like I'm going to cry a little bit. It's going to be a great day. And then I smile.
Oh my gosh. Good for you. Good for you.
And it's just lovely. So thank you for that, for me being able to learn that from you. Just a couple more questions. You talk about how when habits become natural, they become a part of your identity.
Right.
So let's fast forward 1 year. It's now 2021. What habit would you like to become a part of your identity this year?
Oh, true confession. Because a project like a book, Tiny Habits, I'm bringing together so much new work. It's not a summary of old material. It's my work, and it's work that hasn't been described before. So a book like this is a massive effort. And then to make it easy to understand and fun to read and true stories. The time and energy it took to do that over the last 2.5 years also led to a lot of my friendships getting a lot weaker. I'll just be frank here. Where not my closest relationship with my partner and my closest friend is tight, but there's this other layer of friendship that I feel like I've neglected, and it's entirely because I didn't give it the time. So what I'm hoping to reclaim and rekindle is use the Tiny Habits method and what I know about habits to strengthen those friendships that I frankly have neglected. And now's the time. The book is out there and I'm so happy, and I'll be supporting the book and helping people learn how to apply it, of course, but it won't take the kind of massive commitment and high cost that putting a book together like this takes. And so that's what, a year from now, I will be designing my habits in my life to strengthen those relationships and create new ones, not distant ones, not just Instagram followers, but close relationships.
Do you have any one thing that you already know you're going to put in place around your friendships?
Yes.
Would you share it?
Yeah. Sending real birthday cards and mostly handmade ones. And it only takes, it's a small thing, right? But imagine, everyone think of your own life on your birthday. How many actual birthday cards do you get? And how many of those are handmade? Yeah. And I think it's a way, and I won't do it for, I have tons of cousins and things like that. I won't do it for my 200 cousins, but for the relationships that I feel like, wow, I've let this slide, or here's a person who needs my support, or we need to be closer, to then create the habit of, sending them a real birthday card, and ideally one that's made, and it doesn't have to be great. I started doing this already.
Yeah.
And just take a moment to acknowledge them in a real form that shows up in their mailbox and they can keep and enjoy.
Yeah, they'll feel seen in a way that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
I love that. All right. So BJ, for our listeners who are intrigued by your work and want to further engage with you, in addition to buying and reading your book, how, from an online perspective, what's the best sort of next step for them to understand and get to know you and your work better?
Certainly buy the book. There's a lot in there that you can't get anywhere else. And I, as you heard, put a lot of time and effort into that. There's an online program, a 5-day program in Tiny Habits. It's free. It's similar to the program that I've taught ever since 2011, similar to the 40,000 people that have gone through it. And you can sign up for that at any time. Some people sign up over and over. That's certainly a good way. And most of the time now, there are other coaches that I've trained that will coach you. Next level up is kind of a big jump. I teach a boot camp in behavior design that costs actually a lot of money, and it's for professionals. It's for professionals who are designing products to help their patients be healthier, help their citizens recycle more. It's not like to change your own behavior, but you will learn a lot about my work in that. And that's a game changer for a lot of companies who are creating products and services to influence behavior. And that is 12 people, 2 days. It's quite a big jump up from the free program in the book. So start with, the book and the free program. But if you are working professionally on climate action, we're doing a special thing there. If you're helping patients, members be healthier, if you're helping people with more financial security and so on, professionally helping members or customers, then my boot camp in behavior design is the place to learn and apply my work.
Okay, that's great. I think that's super helpful and comprehensive. All right, final 2 questions. What do you want to say to yourself that had the dream that you needed to write the book? What do you want to say to that self in your dream?
You did it. Good for you. Keep going.
Yeah. I'm high-fiving you. I'm actually fist bumping you right now. I'm fist bumping yourself in your dream. That is so fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Any final advice or suggestions to our listeners who are ready to jump to the new S-curve of a habit? It could be something you've already mentioned, but any just final thoughts?
Just dive in. It's not because it's tiny, you can start anytime and it's easy. You're not making a huge commitment. You're not setting yourself up on social media that, you might not look good. Just dive in, just get started and have fun with it. Like you said, it's an exercise from my book. You recognize you change best by feeling good, not feeling bad. And so this in Tiny Habits is a change process that's easy, it's fast, and it makes you feel good. And in that way, it transforms your life. But don't think you have to wait till you're ready. You're ready now because it's so tiny.
BJ Fogg, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
At a time of the year when we're looking back and projecting forward and dreaming and creating plans for who and what we want to become, this formula of behavior happens when 3 things, motivation, ability, and prompt, come together at the same moment is so helpful. Start with the prompt. Was it there? Was it clear? If it is, do we have the ability to get the behavior accomplished? Is it simple? Is it easy? And if it is, and we still aren't changing our behavior, we need to take a look at our motivation. There is no should. Just create a habit around something you want to do, like surf. And in the spirit of following up, I did send an email to prompt BJ to send me his surfing picture, and he sent it right away. If you'd like to see it, it's in the show notes. Go to whitneyjohnson.com/podcast to link to the episode. And don't you love the pearl habits we talked about? Because we can change best by feeling good, not bad. We can use irritants and things that trigger us to become something beautiful. Finally, I'm still thinking about BJ's dream about the plane crash and the feeling of regret at not sharing his life's work. So glad that he had the dream and that he wrote the book. As you're setting intentions and goals for this coming year at the start of a new decade, is there something in you that needs to come forth? Something you need to create, to do, to say? We're here to be of service to one another, to help one another, and we can't do that through regret. As BJ said about jumping to a new curve, dive in. Start small. You don't have to wait until you're ready. You're ready now. If you found that what you learned in this episode was helpful, I hope you will feel motivated, there's a prompt, to pay it forward and share the episode with someone or write a review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. People have continued to find us as you have generously shared your favorite episodes and takeaways on social media and have taken the time to leave 5-star ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. So I want to now take a moment and read our review of the week from Gary Stockton. He says, if you're looking for a podcast where you can learn from people who took a leap of faith by disrupting their career, this would be the one. Whitney Johnson sets a great vibe and asks each guest thought-provoking questions. This makes the podcast interesting and very often makes me look up information about the guest. The show has enriched my life in many ways, mostly through the discovery of new books or thought leaders. Thank you so much, Gary. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe and scroll back through some of our past episodes. I continue to learn from them and use them in my life and coaching, and am grateful to have wonderful guests to talk with, like today's guest, BJ Fogg. Thank you to him for being here. Thank you to sound engineer Melissa Ruddy, manager, producer Macy Robison, content contributors Emily Davis and Nancy Wilson, and art director Brandon Jameson. I'm Whitney Johnson, and this is Disrupt Yourself.